Hi, welcome to Life and Hope, the first podcast from the Abortion Survivors Network. I'm Melissa Oden, the founder and CEO. I'm the author of You Carried Me, A Daughter's Memoir, and Abortion Survivors Break Their Silence, which will be published by Focus on the Family in January 2024. In case you don't know, the Abortion Survivors Network was founded in 2012 and became a nonprofit in 2019, when the numbers of abortion survivors and families reaching out for help, coupled with the great need for public awareness, grew to the point that I could no longer provide it myself. Many people recognize the Abortion Survivors Network as an expert in advocacy for abortion survivors and as a network where survivors from around the world connect. But we do so much more, as you'll learn in these podcast episodes, as I interview survivors, mothers, adoptive families, friends, former abortion workers, and so many more impacted by failed, stopped, and reversed abortions. At the Abortion Survivors Network, we end the generational trauma of abortion by saving survivors at the first chance of intervention. That starts with seeing, loving well, and serving the mother who has attempted an abortion and needs help and hope. What have I done to my baby? Is there any hope for their life? For me? We field those questions every day, hence the name of this podcast, Life and Hope. Every day we see that where there is life, there is hope, and we want to share it with you so you can see and hear what we do and be encouraged and strengthened by it. Life and Hope is the only podcast dedicated to the stories, the statistics, the behind the curtain, beyond the news look at abortion survivors and the impact that attempted abortions have. Some of the news stories we will highlight are difficult to face, but those stories pale in comparison to the powerful, real stories and experiences you'll hear from survivors, mothers, family members, and more. Thank you for joining us in today's episode. Before I introduce you to today's guest, I want to do a quick roundup of news stories about abortion survivors and highlight upcoming events. Here are some of the top stories from around the globe focused on abortion survivors or attempted abortions. Over the weekend, Priscilla Hurley, our Alaska awareness advocate, wrote a fantastic piece for Focus on the Family. If you go to focusonthefamily.com/pro-life/can a baby survive an abortion? I did. And we'll be sure to put that in the comment section so you can find it. You will read this really powerful piece where Priscilla highlights the generational trauma of abortion and the powerful role that healing has played in her life and in her family. Focus on the Family are incredible allies in this work. Obviously, as you can tell, here I am going to be publishing a book in January with them, but I deeply appreciate this particular article because it highlights not just Priscilla's story and the importance of healing, but includes a lot of the statistics that we've identified through the Abortion Survivors Network. And it even discusses some of the upcoming events we have, like our September Awareness Month. So, can a baby survive an abortion? I did. Be sure to check that one out. Share it with other people. The other piece of news I wanted to highlight is from Sidewalk Advocates for Life. If you didn't catch me on their podcast last week, I was so blessed to join my friends Nate and Lauren on their Friday podcast, really talking about the needs of women who are taking the abortion pill and experiencing them fail, where Sidewalk advocates are going to find them, and really talking about the needs of everybody impacted by abortion. So if you didn't catch me in that, head over to Facebook. That was posted on Friday, the 18th. Listen in at around the 32-minute mark from that podcast to hear more. Those are our major stories, but I would encourage you to also go to our blog. That is abortionsurvivors.org. Go down to the bottom of the page and click on blog. There have been some great pieces included there recently, including a really important piece about the ABCs of pro-life policy written by Sarah, who is our public affairs team member here at the Abortion Survivors Network. Head over to the blog. Check that out. Also read more about the generational trauma of abortion. We talk about that a lot in our blog. I want to now talk about some upcoming events. Many of our programs and events are privately held with those we serve. Our support groups for moms who are pregnant or parenting after an attempted abortion, as well as our support groups for adoptive parents and our community Zooms for adult survivors occur monthly. For more information on those groups or to talk to one of our team members for one-on-one support, please contact us at programs@abortionsurvivors.org, or you can always send us a note on our website. For access to our additional community, healing, and speaker supports, you can reach out to us there as well. So that is programs@abortionsurvivors.org. We really do have a lot of upcoming public events and appearances, so keep an eye out for us, and for more information, visit our website. I want to highlight just a few of them here today. The month of September is now Babies Survive Abortions Awareness Month. Thank you for joining us in spreading awareness and bringing hope to all of those impacted. We have so many events and releases this month, it would honestly take a whole episode to cover them. What I can say right now is subscribe to our newsletter if you haven't yet. Again, the website is abortionsurvivors.org, and then just click on subscribe to our newsletter and receive all the details about press conferences, the launch of state awareness advocates, a new merchandise launch. I can tell you the merch is really fabulous, video premieres, and so much more. Of course, you'll also want to tune into this podcast to get all of the story behind the story interviews with survivors, their family, and friends. Other upcoming events, you can catch our team in Nashville, September 19th through 21st for the Samaritan Summit, where I'll also be an MC. Be sure to stop by our exhibit table to see our new video releases and tell Allie from the marketing team hello. The fall also continues to be a busy time of speaking for many survivors who speak at events, including still me. You'll see me on September 14th in Columbus, Ohio, Springfield, Illinois on the 21st, Pendleton, Oregon on September 26th, and Macon, Georgia on the 28th. If you're interested in knowing any more about these events, please reach out to us at info@abortionsurvivors.org. Although we share so many behind-the-scenes stories and events here on the podcast, events for ASN and survivors who are advocates get added frequently. So don't be surprised if you see us at more events than even those that are highlighted here. Well, today I have the incredible pleasure of speaking with Karen Stahl from Georgia. We are so honored to have her, to know her, and to have her important voice and experience shared this September in our groundbreaking video series that highlights the hope that can be found even after an attempted abortion. Karen, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
It's one of those things where your voice is courageous. You are courageous, and I don't want that to sound trite. So just know that we are deeply honored by you and you sharing your story with us. There is something really powerful that happens when one person finds and uses their voice. So let's kind of start there. What would you like people to know when it comes to your particular experience? If you had to tell somebody, my name's Karen and here's what I've experienced, what would you want them to know?
That's a loaded question. I think from my perspective, I attempted to have an abortion over 40 years ago. And after the experience was over, I stuffed it away. I built an incredible life with 3 children and a husband. And sadly, maybe no one in my life knows what the experience that I had 41 years ago. I think most people would be shocked to know that. So it's really hard for me to talk about it and to go public with my story. I I'm doing it because if it can help someone, like I feel like it's not my story. I feel like it's God's story, and I have to put it out there and just let the chips fall where they may.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's the courage and the beauty of it all, is knowing that as hard as it can be to be so vulnerable, you share it in the hopes that it makes a difference for somebody else.
Well, I gave Lauren, my daughter, permission to go public, and then this just seems like the next step, I guess.
That those two things fit together.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. When you go back to over 40 years ago, Karen, what would you say the cultural climate was like for you, or what was family climate, school climate? I think we think about, how does someone's perception of abortion get shaped? And so I'm just curious, how would you describe that? Did you know anything about abortion? Set the stage for us.
I grew up in a very dysfunctional family. My mother was in a tragic car accident when I was a child, and because of it, she was both physically and mentally handicapped. And so my parents were so focused on themselves and their own problems that my sister and I were just kind of baggage, maybe, is kind of how it felt. So we kind of raised ourselves. And I was not around pregnant people. I didn't know anything about pregnancy. I didn't know anything about abortion. I was a really good student in school and very athletic, played all the sports, and then went to college.
And from a kind of a time standpoint, Roe would have passed sometime before you went to college.
I had no knowledge of it. It wasn't even something on my radar.
So you went away to college,
Mm-hmm.
and probably didn't know a whole lot about abortion.
No, nothing.
And then became pregnant.
Yeah. And sadly, I mean, if you've heard my story, then you know that I've been in multiple abortion clinics in multiple states. And even given that, I still really knew nothing about abortion. It's not like when you go to a clinic, they explain to you what's going to happen. I think that purposefully they don't tell you that, because I think that would scare you way more than actually having a baby.
Mm-hmm. And so I think that's important that you shared that, because I think when people hear your story, they would go, hey, come on, the first time, the second time, maybe the third time.
Like, how could you be so stupid?
But you made such an important point. They didn't tell you what was going on.
No, and I saw ultrasound pictures, which is what they use to determine if they could do an abortion. But I didn't even know what I was looking at. Like, there was a circle on a screen, and I didn't know what that circle was.
And even still today, I don't know that everybody's aware of this, but the abortion industry tends to fight against legislation that would have women see the image of their ultrasound. I mean, what they did with you, Karen, is a pattern that we see continued still today.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know, and this is a hard question, so if it's way too hard and maybe you don't know the answer, but knowing Lauren, I've thought about it a lot.
Mm-hmm.
That final abortion clinic that you went into, do you know what the next step of the abortion procedure would have been if you would have continued it?
I don't think I understood what would happen. I maybe the ignorance was security for me at that time. I don't know. But I didn't even realize at that point how big the baby was.
Mm-hmm.
I never looked pregnant, so I didn't have any there was no baby bump. So it's not like I could look down and see evidence, of a baby.
Your experience is a lot like my birth mom's. I was telling you, she's back there behind me in a photo with my biological dad.
Mhm.
My abortionist had put on the medical records. He thought she was about 18 to 20 weeks pregnant with me when she was forced to have the abortion. And when I was born, I was 2 pounds, 14 ounces. So I was pretty similar in size to Lauren.
Mhm.
And a neonatologist wrote in my records, he thought she was probably about 31 weeks.
Wow.
And I think your point is such an interesting one because you were a lot like my birth mom in terms of age, being a college student. When I started to learn my birth mom's story, she shared, she was also an athlete, had irregular periods, and here she was pregnant for almost 31 weeks. Didn't
Mhm.
even know that she was pregnant. I mean, her twin sister
Mhm.
shared a college dorm with her and said, I thought there was something wrong with her for a while. I thought maybe she had like leukemia or something. And now we laugh and go, phew, it was just a baby. Too bad not everybody thought like, phew. But I think it's important to share these stories because how many 19-year-old women still today, Karen, are in similar shoes where they just don't know?
Probably a lot.
Yeah. And the abortion industry is like, hey, I think we like it that way.
I think so.
Mm-hmm.
You can't make money if they know what you're really doing.
Exactly. So, yeah, when I think about the final step of the abortion, and that's what, part of what we're doing in September is helping people understand what does a stopped abortion even mean? Somebody asked me in an interview the other day, they said, do you mean like when a woman reverses her chemical abortion? And I said,
Mhm.
no, that's something different. A stopped abortion is like in your circumstance, you're starting the abortion procedure, and for one reason or another, typically the woman is the one who decides to stop it because of pain or you change your mind. Sometimes the abortionist stops it because they find out you're much further along. I
Mhm.
mean, isn't it interesting how even as a woman, you're not really quite sure at the time?
Right.
Abortionists aren't quite sure most of the time either. And again, as long as things go the way they expect them to, I think they're okay with that.
Right.
So a stopped abortion tends to be stopped at typically a late term. And yeah, I think Lauren knows this. I don't know that she and I have ever talked a whole lot about it, but my guess is that the next step of that abortion would have been probably dismemberment.
Correct. I mean, I know that now. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't know that then. And
Mm-hmm.
she knows that.
Mm-hmm.
She did the research to find
Mm-hmm.
out.
And I'm sure that's horribly painful for you because you can't imagine that would be the outcome for this person that you love.
Right. But of course, on that end, it was, I had a completely different mindset.
Mm-hmm.
I was just trying to eliminate the problem and get on with my life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's also, I think, important for people to understand, especially in the pro-life movement, we use terminology, people will say things like, well, a woman is abortion vulnerable or she's abortion minded. And the reality is, yes, sometimes women are absolutely 100% abortion minded.
Well,
And
for me, there was no other
right,
choice.
right, because of circumstance, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's what we want people to understand, right? It's the circumstance that someone is in, the crisis. And, I think you and I have talked about that a little bit of how, right, the brain, just when you're in that place of crisis, that your fight or flight is kicking in hard.
Right.
When you look back on that time, I know you had a picture of what your life would look like. And even based on you talking about your family at the time, I'm going to guess you did not picture a pregnancy factoring into how you saw your life.
Not at all. And I didn't even think I liked kids, and that's coming from a retired school teacher. So, like, I did really well in school, and I think school was like my safe place, that I could get away from home and do really well, like sports and school. And so I pictured myself having some high powered career, making a lot of money, um, doing what the world tells you to do to be successful. And that's what I was chasing.
Would you, looking back on that now, what would you tell your younger self about what life would look like? You're like, that's a whole other podcast.
Right. Well, when you're a teenager, well, in my case, I didn't know anything about life, and thinking that I wanted to be a lawyer or an engineer or something like that, and probably maybe have one or two kids, down the road somewhere, but I ended up being a high school teacher and not making a lot of money. And my family is the most important thing to me. So it's just funny that things just turn out maybe the opposite of what you expect.
Is that what you would want a woman in your shoes who's considering abortion to even know right now? Like, it may not be anything like you expect.
Right. Well, that plus the fact that what seems like a crisis or, the biggest problem you've ever dealt with will or could end up being the greatest joy in your life. You just don't understand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that perception as well. I think, I like to remind people circumstances are temporary.
Yes.
And I think when I look back on my life, I mean, a lot of people know this about me. I have two girls. So I have a 15-year-old and I have a 9-year-old, and my 9-year-old was born with significant health needs. And I can remember really wrestling with God, sitting in a hospital room for over a month with her when she had back-to-back surgeries. And in the midst of watching her struggle, I remember one day I looked at her and I just said, I wonder who she would be, Lord, if she wasn't going through this. And it was like 2x4 upside my head, right? And it was like God spoke to me and said, well, she wouldn't be who I made her to be.
Right.
And I just kind of went, gulp. Got it.
Yeah. Well, like we named Lauren because that name means victorious.
Mm.
And Lauren has always been a fighter.
Mm-hmm. There's something really beautiful about that, isn't there? Yeah. In the midst of the suffering and the sorrow, there is something so beautiful. And I think about that a lot as well at this point in my life. Like, we don't get to choose the joy or the suffering. Those two things tend to be very commingled.
Right.
Yet our world would say, hey, you can have just joy, right? You should be pursuing that. I mean, that's what Karen, right, 4 decades ago was like, yeah, I'm here for that.
Right. I mean, we just want to be comfortable and we want life to go, straight. And unfortunately, the ups and downs are what it's all about. And that's what makes us who we are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So agree. When you talk about Lauren and being victorious, remind me how far along you were, because I sometimes get the weeks a little bit mixed up.
Well, I think it's debatable because
that's true.
What the ultrasounds said and then what happened in reality were two different things. Like, it never jived. It never made sense. But according to the last ultrasound I had, I was 21.3 or 21.6 weeks pregnant.
And when she was delivered, or was it like a few weeks after that?
It was many weeks after that.
Mm-hmm.
And she was 26 weeks when she was born. So the numbers never added up correctly.
Mm-hmm. But a 26 weeker born even outside of an abortion that was stopped can be such a deeply concerning situation for a mom, for a family, for medical professionals. I can imagine that felt really scary at the time.
Well, it felt like the worst joke because, you know, I, it was obvious that God went to a lot of trouble to save her. And then for me to go into premature labor unexpectedly, like for no apparent reason, um, it just seemed like the ultimate prank.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that night, though, in and of itself, ultimately kind of changed the course of everything, because the people on staff didn't know what kind of decision you had been considering.
Right. Like at the doctor's office in my paperwork, it said that I was giving the baby up for adoption. But because I went into premature labor and went to the hospital in the middle of the night, and everything was so weird, and the way it all happened, after she was born, like William went to the NICU with her. And later in the day, they asked me if I wanted to see her. And I said yes. And after I saw her, I couldn't give her up. And so it was just the strangest turn of events.
For someone who's been in your shoes and went through that process of being so abortion minded because of the circumstances you were in, put us in your shoes the first time you saw her. Because I know what it's like, right? When I've given birth to my babies, the first time I've seen them. But what was that like for you after going through all that process? It was like instantly love, or?
Yes, instantly love, instantly, oh my God, what have I done? So many things. Because she was born so premature, she looked like a little alien, you know. So she didn't really look like a baby, but it changed everything.
Mm-hmm. She was still beautiful, and she was yours. And she's a spitting image of you.
well, you haven't seen my husband, but she's actually, she looks
Really?
a lot like him. Yeah.
Well, there is something about your insides matching as well.
Funny how that works, right?
Yeah, I definitely think she has a lot of you in her.
A lot of that firstbornness that we both have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Strength and stubbornness, I think, is the word that I've heard a lot of.
Mm-hmm.
Words I know nothing about. Must be something about the whole experience that shapes us.
I think so.
When you think back also to the pregnancy with Lauren, and even after she was born, who was there for you the most? Like, if you could make your, top 5 list, were there a handful of people who were most there for you?
You said after she was born?
Even before, I mean, and maybe, maybe the before list and then the after list, was it different?
Really the same. You know that I went to live with Bill and Jana while I was pregnant, and they were from William's hometown. So, I was in a new place for me. So I didn't know anyone except for them and William.
Mm-hmm. Talk about William.
As far as,
what's the experience been like with him? I mean, where was he during the pregnancy? Certainly the role that he played.
Well, during the pregnancy, there were times that I hated his guts.
I love your honesty.
I made up my mind how to handle being pregnant, and he was not on board with it. And there were long periods of time that I didn't speak to him. He would come to my apartment and I would slam the door in his face. Um, he tried so hard to convince me that abortion was wrong, and he never, I guess, really never empathized, with my situation. And my response was just, I don't care if it's wrong. Like, this is what I have to do. We had only been together for like 3 months when I got pregnant, and we had never talked about getting married. I was 18 years old. So, I just saw things very differently than he did. And even though he advocated for life, he didn't really give me any practical how-tos.
Right. Got it. Have you guys ever talked about that over the years of like, man, I know that you meant well, but here's what would have been more helpful for me?
Yeah. I mean, there was a couple that lived in the same apartment complex with him, a Christian couple, and he told them about what had happened, and they invited the two of us to come over so that they could talk to me. And it was a horrible experience. It was another case of, people telling me that what I was doing was wrong and murder, and but yet not giving me any way out.
Mm-hmm. You needed hope. You needed help.
Well, I needed something besides just being told that what I was doing was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What's one tangible thing that would have made a difference for you?
I think for me at the time, if I had understood pregnancy, even like how far along I was, particularly, later in the journey, that would have, I don't know if it would have changed my mind, but it would have at least helped me make a decision,
Mm-hmm.
And when William came to Dallas to meet me at the abortion clinic, and he told me that he had already arranged a place for me to stay and, people to take care of me, I guess. That was very tangible.
Mm-hmm.
Because going home was not an option. There was no support there. So at least, there I was given an option.
Mm-hmm. But I think that's an important point you make as well, Karen, of like just basic information, right?
Mm-hmm.
Letting women know what it's like to be 12 weeks along, 20 weeks along, the humanity of their child. I think sometimes we can almost take that for granted, right? Of like, well, we know everything in today's world with the internet.
Oh, but back then there wasn't an internet. And like, I just thought that it was a blob, and I didn't know.
And unfortunately, I think the abortion industry still tries to thrive on that of like, yeah, it's just a clump of tissue, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a medical procedure.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So start with information, provide or assess for what kind of needs somebody has, and then give them information about those supports that are available.
That's what I can come up with.
Mm-hmm. No, that's really helpful. Why do you think Jana and Bill were brought into your life?
Ooh. I mean, it was a God thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think living with Bill and Jana I lived with them for several months. And, it was the first time I had ever lived in a normal family, to see how a normal family operates. So, that was a big deal. And
Mm-hmm.
then just the fact that they would take in a stranger, they didn't know me. Um, I can't even imagine the kind of courage that it took for them to do that. But yet they felt like God wanted them to do that, and they just did it. No questions asked.
They
Which,
did more than just tell you what you should or shouldn't do.
right. I mean, they provided a place for me, and they provided emotional support, and I could not have done it without them.
And I'm guessing, knowing now how important family is to you, that you saw something even in their family that probably didn't just help save Lauren's life, but it helped you envision what family can look like.
Yeah, what a normal family can be. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's something really powerful about that as well. And again, something that I think people can take for granted in today's world, right? Most people don't really even know what a healthy family unit looks like.
Right. And I think I'm just the poster child for, the old song, looking for love in all the wrong places, because I didn't get that at home. And so, now you see the consequences of that.
Mm-hmm. But that's a very self-aware thing for you to even figure out, Karen. I would say, I think we live in a culture where so many people are walking around wounded like that, and people don't even have that awareness that that's what they're operating from.
Right. I mean, when you're in it, you don't know it.
Mm-hmm. When you think about Lauren's life growing up, so you're
Mhm.
blessed, right, to live with Jana and Bill. And I mean, spoiler alert, you're still with William.
Mhm. 40 years later.
I mean, there's a lesson in and of itself for people. Um, but when you think about Lauren's life growing up,
Mhm.
were there ever points in her life where you would look at her and you would think back to the abortion, or was it just something that you had so far tucked on a shelf that it just didn't?
It was just buried away.
Mm.
Like, I I get the best, analogy I can give you is, how when you go through labor and delivery and it's so terrible, and yet once you have the baby, you just forget all that. I think what I went through was sort of like that, where maybe your mind does that for you, where it erases or puts away all of the hurt and the pain, and um, especially with time, you just forget.
Mm-hmm.
I would hear people talk about miracles, and on the inside, I would think, well, you wouldn't imagine the miracles that I've seen or I've experienced. But the whole William calls it the abortion capers. So there's no memory of the abortion capers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and that's what I often think about. I mean, I know what it's like to be in a survivor's shoes, where we live in a culture that talks about this all the time, and there's arguments about it and there's policy about it. But at the same time, I'm always watching it, listening, and thinking, y'all have no idea.
Mm,
You just don't even know. And I
right.
mean, would you have those moments where you would be like,
Yeah. I mean, if there was something in the news about abortion, coming out on the other side, obviously, I have a very pro-life position. For a brief period of time, I volunteered at a crisis pregnancy center. But then after I had two kids, like I couldn't do that anymore. Um, So, it was always kind of bubbling beneath the surface, but um, I never gave lip service to it. I never told anybody what had happened to me.
Why do you think that is? Just because it was better put on the shelf so you could keep going in life?
I think there's an oof. Even still, there's a lot of guilt,
Mhm.
a lot of shame.
And that's why it's so powerful that you are willing to share, because this is not like you woke up one day and went, it sounds like fun.
No. And how it happened, that I eventually told Lauren her story. And it took a while, but after a period of time, she wanted to share her story. And I wanted her to be able to do that. I didn't want to do it. So I gave her permission to share, and never really thought about the ramifications to me until she started sharing. And then I've had to deal with my baggage, that I hadn't dealt with.
And I want people to understand that this is not just something that happens to you and Lauren and your family. I see this played out in the lives of survivors around the world. Most people don't understand that we have found most survivors are actually raised in their biological family, and that there's such tension that exists in families, right? Even though, even if you're a person of faith, or you see that there can be good that comes from sharing that story, there is that innate tension that is like, man, I'm going to share this story with you, but don't ever tell anybody else. Or I don't want everybody to know. Some people can know. I mean, is there a way we can bottle this and only let certain people know? Like, is that a thing?
Well, like with her, I gave her permission to share, but I didn't even think about how it would make me feel or anything like that until it happened. I'm going to run and get a tissue.
That's perfect.
Don't want to have an embarrassing moment.
That's all right. This is real life, right? I mean, again, I think it's important for the world to see. Like, we are real people with real stories. They're not simple.
No.
They're not linear. They're not perfect. They're usually quite messy. But there's still hope to be found in the midst of it.
Right.
When you think back to telling Lauren and then where she's at now, do you see a difference in her, in where she's at?
Well, I know you've heard her talk about at the time frame when I told her, she was really struggling with what to do with her life. She had majored in broadcast journalism in college, and had seen the ugly underbelly of that, and kind of didn't want to do it anymore, but yet didn't know what to do with herself. She kind of felt a pull to ministry. And then I think when I told her her story, it rocked her world. And it I don't know, it kind of it really kind of turned her in a different direction, I think.
And do you think you're in a different place now than the first time you shared the story with her?
I mean, I was a mess then, and I'm a mess now. So in that way, I'm still the same, but it's been, I mean, it was the summer after she graduated from college. So like, it's been a long time, since I told her. Um, I guess I'm working through healing, not in a, um, I'm not seeing a therapist or anything like that. I guess just kind of, dealing with my own stuff where I hadn't before.
Right. You're not keeping it on a shelf. That's a step in the right direction.
Well, and I think it's important for people to know, like, obviously there was a lot of trauma involved in that experience, all of it. And, I wasn't mature enough to even recognize that or even know what that was. And so I guess 40 years later, then I'm trudging through the trauma,
It's an unraveling of things. If it was easy to tackle, it'd be done.
Right.
And that's what I like people to understand as well about survivors and moms in particular. We are more alike than we are different. And so I see survivors put their pain and their trauma on shelves in the hopes that maybe it'll go away.
Right.
And so we offer healing support at the Abortion Survivors Network. So we have a specialized curriculum for survivors, but we also have a social worker, 2 social workers now who work with survivors and moms. And so, as you're doing this unraveling, Kira is here for moms just like you, whether you want to talk to somebody alone or you want to be with a group of women who have walked out similar circumstances. Every woman's experience looks slightly different, but there's something to be said for being able to look at another woman and go, wow, you can understand me.
Right. I think with anything, you feel like you're the only one going through that. So there's comfort in numbers.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, right, when we think about even educating people about this being a thing, if there are thousands of abortion survivors every year, then there are thousands of women like you every year. There are thousands of men like William, right? Take that times years and years and years. You're so far from alone, Karen.
Well, and like I've seen a statistic that even our churches are filled with women who've had abortions. And just like I was up until a month ago, no one knew that about me. And I may be sitting next to women in my own church that have had abortions and no one knows.
What would you say to them right now?
Like, I guess that I don't feel like everyone is called to go public necessarily with that information, but it is very personal. But at the same time, I feel like you need to deal with the trauma of it and talk to somebody because it has to affect your life, even though you're not even aware that it's happening.
Yeah, that's such an important point. Not everyone, and I would say very rarely are people called to share their story very publicly. But the healing is so important. You may never whisper your story to anybody else, or maybe it's just the one person that you're working with about it. But yeah, it sets you free. Like that day when I first met you and you first spoke and I looked at you and went, whoa, you look different. Not that you didn't look great before, but I can say after you shared, I just went, wow, visible transformation.
Wow. See, I didn't know that until you said it. So
it's almost like you go from shoulders kind of tight, right? You can just feel that tension. And then you start to speak and you're like, oh, wow, a load's been lifted from my shoulders.
Right.
Mm-hmm. You know, you shared what you would want someone to know after an abortion. What would you want a woman to know who's maybe considering abortion right now, or maybe she's attempted an abortion and she's not sure, you know, she's still pregnant and she's not sure if she's going to have another abortion to end it? What
Right.
would you say?
I think the biggest thing that I would tell them is things are not as hopeless
Mm.
as what you think they are. It's so easy to get caught up in your circumstances and think that your life is over or this is horrible, you know, things like that. But yet, like I said before, you know, what you consider to be your biggest tragedy could turn into your greatest joy. And I think you need to consider other options.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. Yeah, your greatest, what feels like your greatest tragedy could be your greatest joy.
Mm-hmm.
Therein lies the hope. Well, I had told you we were going to be on for like, 15, 20 minutes. And hey, we covered a lot more than what I think you thought we were going to cover.
That's okay.
Yeah, I think it's better than okay. I think this is exactly what the world needs to hear for the very first time. So I don't take that lightly. I just want to thank you again for being willing to be a part of our video series, for being a part of this podcast and sharing your story. And, I know this is just the beginning. It doesn't mean that Karen has to take a microphone and take a stage, but what I mean is the beginning of that process for you for healing. And I think hearing from other women what your courageousness does for them.
Well, I hope to hear about that. I mean, that's why I'm doing this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I guess now would be a good time for me to say that, if you're tuning into this and you're wondering, how can I pass a message along to Karen? You can actually do it through us at the Abortion Survivors Network. So easiest place would be the Abortion Survivors website. So abortionsurvivors.org. You can click on the form to send us a message there. You can also chat on our website. You can send us a message as well, info@abortionsurvivors.org. And I have no doubt, Karen, we're going to be passing along messages to you. And for you, our audience, we just want you to join Karen and I in this mission. Spread the good news. There is hope where there is life, even when an abortion has been attempted and it failed, or it was stopped, or it was reversed. Women in crisis can reach out to us and find help and find hope through information and support, just like what Karen was talking about. For years to come, and abortion survivors can find community, healing, find and even use their voice to raise awareness to this too unknown but not uncommon experience. And all of you can help be a part in raising awareness. We need you to help spread that good news that babies survive abortions and that there is hope where there is life. Please join us and be an advocate for survivors, for mothers like Karen, and for families to end the generational trauma of abortion. Again, you can subscribe to our podcast on all those platforms. You can sign up for our mailing list on our website. And most importantly, share all these good things with others, even when you find things on social media. Until then, until next time, there is hope where there is life.